for our last half hour, we're going to be speaking with Lovette Thompson with the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. There's been so much in the news lately about what's been happening at the border, but we wanted to go a little deeper into the issue and see what other communities are being affected by these policies. So welcome, Lovette. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me.
Just to begin, could you tell us a little about yourself and how you got involved with this work and with Baji in particular?
So again, thank you for having me. My name is Lovette Kargbo-Thompson. I'm the Atlanta organizer for the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. I've been involved with Baji for now over 2.5 years. My family, parents are both migrants here, both from Sierra Leone, West Africa. And so that has driven me to definitely want to be more engaged with various communities as I see, different policies are impacting our communities.
So the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, can you talk a little bit about its history and what it does?
So the Black Alliance for Just Immigration was founded in April of 2006. It grew out of dialogues, it grew out of efforts with the Priority Africa Network, PAN, which basically brought African Americans and Black immigrants from Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America together to dialogue about the myths and stereotypes, as well as cultural, social, and political issues that divide our communities.
And where presently does Baji organize?
We're organizing in Atlanta in the Clarkston community because we know that that's a large resettlement community, and just in around the area of Georgia, where we see large populations of immigrants.
And you're also in other cities around the country.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're also we're a national organization headquartered in New York City. We have local organizers who are also in California. I myself is here in Georgia, and then we have an organizer in Florida as well.
One thing about the name, so the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. So when we talk about immigrants and refugees, can you explain a little bit about what the difference is?
Refugees are seeking assistance due to catastrophic conditions in their countries, be it war, famine, or if you have asylum seekers who are also seeking assistance, and immigrants, as we know them,
can be moving because
Absolutely.
of looking for work,
Yes.
or because of trade policies, war.
Absolutely.
But there's a particular category, I think, in terms of refugees seeking asylum.
Absolutely.
Because of persecution.
Absolutely. And we've seen an increase in the number of women and children who have been seeking asylum at the borders. But under this administration, we've also seen where those individuals who are seeking asylum and are going through the proper routes are also being detained.
Right. So in the news recently has been the Muslim ban and the Supreme Court decision, and Baji issued a statement on that. Can you talk about Baji's position and how this is going to affect nations in Africa in particular?
Absolutely. So we know that last week the Supreme Court upheld the Trump's administration's Muslim ban. And this ban prohibits citizens from several predominantly Muslim countries, including the African nations of Somalia and Libya, from entering the United States. Those countries that are listed on the Muslim ban are Libya, Iran, Somalia, Syria, Venezuela, Yemen, and North Korea. We've seen various versions of the Muslim ban. On this particular version, there were 2 countries that were added, North Korea and Venezuela. But we know that with Venezuela, it only applies to a handful of officials and their families. And then for North Korea, it has only a little effect since their government only allows few citizens to travel to the U.S. So it's, again, the other countries that are listed on this Muslim ban are majority Muslim countries. And so the ruling comes after the Supreme Court allowed the third version of the Muslim ban to go into effect until it issued this recent filing and ruling. It's also been in effect since December of 2017. The Black Alliance for Just Immigration condemns this ruling, which further embeds xenophobia in this country's immigration policy under the guise of national security.
So could you list again the African countries that are affected by this?
So the two African countries are Somalia and Libya. And we have definitely seen an increase in different communities that have been heavily surveilled, as well as when this administration mentioned any of these countries as countries that are deportable, that they will start deporting. An increase in ICE officials actually going into these communities and deporting these individuals. We have the Somali 92. Many of our members of the community here were a part of that Somali 92 and were deported in an effort to send them back to their country of origin. But what didn't happen, they were then sent back to the U.S. and they're now being held in a detention center in Florida.
And did that 92 include people from Georgia?
Absolutely, from the Clarkston community.
And there had been a previous raid by ICE in Clarkston.
Absolutely.
So this was in addition to?
This was in addition to.
Okay.
And so many advocates across the country have been speaking out against the treatment of the Somali 92 and really pressuring for the release of them. We have our Florida advocate who has definitely been working with different allies in that area to put pressure on council members and just the government in releasing the individuals who've been detained.
So there was a real horror story with that plane ride and people
It was.
being denied water, I think.
Absolutely, and they were, I think, transported in shackles.
Right.
And were kept in shackles the entire time until there was a point where they were actually allowed to use the restroom, but I think they were, even at that time, given bottles if they were men to do so. So very extreme conditions, which are very, reminiscent of slavery. And it's just a modern day slavery that we see that's happening throughout this country.
So when the plane came back, people were dispersed around the country and it's hard to know where people are? Is that?
No, everyone was put into the same detention center in Florida.
Okay.
So that's where they're currently being held.
Okay. So in other Baji news that I've seen recently has been related to what's called TPS and what is happening with Haitians in this country. Can you explain what TPS means?
Sure. So Temporary Protective Status, TPS, was established by Congress in the Immigration Act of the 1990s. It's a humanitarian program whose basic principle is that the U.S. should suspend deportations to countries that have been destabilized by war or catastrophic conditions. Under the law, the Secretary of Homeland Security can extend TPS, Temporary Protective Status, as a result of ongoing armed conflict, environmental disaster, or other extraordinary temporary conditions. And so, as you brought up about the Haitian nationals, it's been deemed that Department of Homeland Security sees fit where the country has been stabilized, and they see fit to return Haitians back to their country. But what we do know is that that's not true, that the country has yet to even come back from devastation caused from the 2010 earthquake. which was followed by an epidemic, a cholera epidemic, that really didn't help the conditions there. And then on top of that, there was the Hurricane Matthew, which also brought more devastation to that area. And when that happened, it also impacted the rural areas where farmers were. It impacted their crops. So it led to famine, where people, there was food insecurity for many people who were there. And so people have sought refuge in countries where they feel that they will be able to get assistance. But unfortunately, what we've seen since all of these devastations have occurred in that country is where Haitian migrants have been migrating, they've been detained, and they've been reaching the Mexican border. They've been detained there as well in the thousands. And they're just being detained for deportation. So it is, it's very unfortunate that their TPS was not extended and that it will be ending by July of 2019.
So, communities here in Atlanta, and I'm assuming in Miami, all Haitians are all over the South and around the country, and people have had children here, gotten jobs here, and now they're facing being uprooted. When will this have to happen? By the middle of next year?
Yeah, and that's just for Haitians. It varies depending on the countries who've been designated, who've been given TPS. Some have already lost their TPS. Hondurans will soon lose theirs, I think July 5th. Those from Nepal have already lost theirs, and there are other countries that are soon to lose theirs as well. El Salvador being the largest country that has the largest number of TPS holders. But TPS protects more than 10,000 Georgians from being returned to countries that have been devastated by natural disasters, wars, epidemics, and other extraordinary conditions. They are a vital part of Georgia, and it is our national interest to create a permanent legislative solution to safeguard TPS holders who have become a part of our state's fabric. To rescind their legal status would tear thousands of Georgians from their American children and their communities. TPS holders make important contributions to our economy and the American workforce. In Georgia, TPS holders work in sectors like construction, childcare, healthcare, hospitality, and service industries. So by removing them from the workforce across the country will result in employers losing billions in turnover caused due to the need to replace and retain workers, and will cause Georgia alone to lose nearly $300 million from our GDP annually. So it's very important that we do all that we can to protect TPS, and we don't force countries to absorb tens of thousands of people while they're still recovering.
And this is, it seems totally arbitrary in terms of trying to decide when a country would be ready to take people back. And once, in terms of self-determination, once people make a choice to leave, they should have the choice to stay. And so this is affecting families,
Absolutely.
communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No matter where you are in the country, it is affecting a lot of different communities and families. And, it's easy to sort of be blindsided by all of the things that are happening these days. Right now, there's a lot of talk in the news media around families being separated at the border. But again, this is something that we've seen before, where families have been separated or even sold. And so we want to make sure that these policies are not ones that we are going to stand by and allow for our communities to be ripped apart.
One thing you mentioned that I think most people don't hear very much about is when we think about who's at the border now, we're talking about people from Guatemala, Honduras, like you mentioned, El Salvador, mostly from Central America. But you mentioned there are Africans
Absolutely.
and people from Haiti who are choosing to try to enter from the Mexico side. Is that
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Over the past 18 months, we've seen an increase of black immigrants who have sought entry through San Diego. And so there is where also a lot of immigrants are being detained. And there's a lack of resources to support them, primarily around language barriers. Oftentimes, the languages are not being, there's no one to interpret what's needing to be translated and shared so that these individuals can turn in their paperwork on time and receive what they're needing as far as assistance. So there's a lot of work to be done as far as the resources that need to be there in place. Oftentimes applications are just in Spanish and English, which is to me a problem when there's so many different languages out here and people who are impacted by these programs. There should be more done around making that accessible.
So you about being blindsided, and it's like every day it seems like there's a new story, a new human rights violation. What does Baji try to do in a period like this? What are your strategies about how to fight back?
So we want to make sure that we continue to engage different communities around our issues and make sure that our voices aren't lost in all that is happening. And we want to make sure that we continue to educate and advocate for our communities and making sure that we continue to put pressures on our senators and representatives so that they can act to do something that will help to preserve and protect these programs.
One of the chants that came up at the rally that I went to last Thursday was Black Power, Brown Power. How do you see the relationship forming between Latino immigrants and African descendant peoples in terms of the movement that we need to turn this around?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's very important that, again, that we continue to lift up black and brown communities as they are the primary targets when it comes to immigration reform. But also, I think we have to be very intentional of how we are presenting our message and making sure that we're very clear as to those groups who are most impacted and most marginalized under these particular, under the Muslim ban and all these other policies, that we're very intentional in lifting up the voices of those groups who will be most impacted, which, again, are black immigrants who stand to be mostly impacted by this Muslim ban. And we also want to make sure that, when we're advocating, that we're not only advocating for a DREAM Act, but a clean one that includes protections around these programs, like temporary protective status, that we want to make sure that we protect. So we have to be intentional on lifting up the voices of those that we don't often hear, but are mostly impacted by what's happening.
And I think you're bringing out some vision for not just what we're fighting against, but what we're for in terms of policy changes that need to be made, so that honors the self-determination of people to move. And really, I think when it comes to a country like Haiti, the reparations this government needs to provide to rebuild that country after all that it's done to it.
Absolutely. And not just that country.
There's a long list.
There's a long list, absolutely. And, even to those Native Americans, there's so much that needs to be done. But again, we have to remember to lift up the voices of these voices that we don't usually hear about and that are most marginalized. We know that even here in Atlanta, the majority of those that are being detained there are of Haitian descent. So, there's a real issue when we're talking about, those who are actually being detained and deported. And while we're not hearing more about what's happening to them. So we need to make sure that we're also lifting up those voices.
Can I ask a question? So one of the things I've noted and that we've talked about here on the program is, of course, that for decades many unions never took on this subject at all. But what we have noted in the recent months and years is that a number of unions are very actively supporting their own members who have been taken in by ICE, and that they have actually done a lot of education. So what I guess I'm asking is the other kinds of alliances, the other segments of the population, whether it's religious-based groups or I don't know, any other kind of groupings besides labor, if there's anything that you would want to comment about progress on that issue here in Atlanta.
Absolutely. I've been, fortunate enough to join the sanctuary movement, and they have been very active in building with grassroots organizations, really hearing a lot of our concerns, and definitely being very intentional on how they show up to support. We've had faith leaders who have shown up in court proceedings, who have shown up where we've fought against SB 452 here, which, SB 452 would have allowed for local police officers to collude with ICE. And so they have shown up, and we continue to build on that to engage different communities outside of just those social justice organizations who are doing this work, but those who not necessarily would be doing it, we're definitely reaching beyond to bring more people in, and they are supporting.
And one of the other things, of course, about the unions is that more and more of their membership are immigrants or have come in the past and maybe citizens now, but have family. So it's like many of the issues that are becoming more relevant to unions. So I just wanted to give a shout out to those unions that are in fact stepping up.
Absolutely.
And I think Dawn has a question.
I wanted to know, most of these demonstrations that we see out on the street now are mostly, our Latinx community. How can we reach out and get, like our Haitian community, our African or Somalian community out in the streets? I would really like to see a group out there about this TPS. How can we reach out and get these folks out in the street?
I think there's, room to continue to engage different communities, but the reality is that a lot of people are living in fear.
Right.
And they're very afraid to come out due to the fact that they could be detained and deported. Yes. And we've seen this happen. So that fear will keep those who are mostly impacted from maybe coming out. But what we can do for those who are legal residents here, who can speak out and stand out for these communities, that we continue to try to engage them and educate them around the issues, because oftentimes people are just unaware of just what this Muslim ban entails and what all of this means. So there's still work to be done around education, but I think the more that we continue to educate people, the more we'll be able to reach people and engage them in what's happening.
And you participated in a forum just the other night, right?
I did. This was a forum held out in Gwinnett County. And so it was very good to do that in a county that is very proud to be a 287G county. But to get the support from community members who were interested in learning more about what the program stands for, what are they doing, and how it impacts those who have been here, to see the community engagement in that was very uplifting. So we have to continue to reach out to different communities where we know those that are impacted may not be able to come out due to fear, but those who can stand up with us in this fight to definitely come out.
So in the last 30 seconds or so, if people want more information about how to get involved with all this great work that Baji is doing, where can they go?
So you can always go to our website at baji.org, which is BAJI.org, or I can be contacted at 404-901-7059. Again, that number is 404-901-7059.
And
And so we've come to the end of another Labor Forum program here at WRFG 89.3 FM. I do want to thank both our guests, Troy Walcott for calling in from New York City with the Spectrum strike, and of course Lovette, who is right here in Atlanta, who we see many times, many places, and many different struggles. And we really appreciate the work that you are doing with Baji and bringing it to our listeners. I want to remind people that our pledge drive starts next Monday, so please do start getting aware of the need for your support for WRFG. And that concludes us for today. Take care, everyone.